Welcome aboard.
Please welcome to the stage Axios senior climate reporter Andrew Friedman.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you to our sponsors, Dell and NVIDIA. They didn't even ask me to say that. I'm just hoping for a new computer. Good morning. It's great to be with you and discuss something that is incredibly relevant and growing in relevance every single day, the future of AI and energy. If you're following along online, please be sure to use the hashtag Axios events. And I'm excited to welcome our first guest to the Axios stage, the director of the Department of Energy's Office of Critical and Emerging Technologies, Helena Fu. Thanks for coming. So, you're kind of the point person for AI at DOE, among other critical technologies. How high a priority is AI and its double-sided nature, meaning the potential that it holds for advancing clean tech and so many other things, and its potential peril of increasing energy demands? How high does that rank on your list of priorities right now? And how quickly has it kind of come up the rung of the ladder of your priorities?
So I think that's a great question. And I think for those who don't know DOE, we have many missions, energy being a critical and important one. But also we have this open scientific discovery and a national security mission through the National Nuclear Security Administration. So when you talk about the promise and the peril, the opportunities and the risks, DOE is an R&D agency that sits at that crux. On the energy space, we see both. We see the promise of AI in all of its applications in the energy space and in materials to make things cheaper, better, faster, safer, as well as the risks of rising energy demand. But really, I want to put that in context here. This rise in energy demand is something that has been planned for, is needed for the clean energy goals that we need to be achieving. It's not only coming from the data centers, it's also coming from electrification, it's coming from the fact that manufacturing is coming back to the United States. So we think that this is really a critical golden moment, an opportunity to pair the demand from data centers for training AI with many of these companies' commitments to clean, firm power to really supercharge the deployment of clean energy and meet this moment not at the expense of the ratepayer.
It's easy to talk about carrots, about encouraging companies to do certain things or utilities to do certain things with bringing more clean, renewable electricity online to meet this demand. We're also seeing utilities choose to try to build more natural gas plants and other baseload power. Are there any sticks that the government should use to make sure AI does not exacerbate energy-related emissions?
So, I think DOE here has many roles to play. We obviously have a huge technical bench, and so that's been traditionally where we've been able to provide a lot of technical assistance to help make energy efficiency gains. Obviously, there is now grants, tax credits loans, a whole suite of things that we have to bring to bear. What I would say is, the department is laser focused on meeting this moment on energy availability, not just for AI, but for all of the growing electrification needs. And, we have not exhausted all of that yet. Not all of the rebates and the tax credits and the loans have been utilized. So what we think is actually needed in this moment is really a focused effort to bring the various parties to the table here and make sure that people understand what the needs are. I mean, there's certainly a lot of shopping around, which is raising the energy forecasts in a way that I think may not be helpful, right? It's really raising the temperature on all of this, where I think if we really focus on this, there's a huge opportunity here.
And how much, we'll get to kind of the framework on AI that DOE has proposed that is in legislation in the Senate right now. But how much of DOE's work will be about leveraging AI for itself or the American people versus helping AI develop with clean power and electricity? Because DOE has so many missions. You guys are in charge of the nuclear stockpile, which so many people in the public don't realize. So I'm curious just about that balance between using AI for the department's mission and using AI for the public good.
I mean, these are two huge parts of the department. I mean, the energy mission here, if you think about the applied energy, and people know us for solar and wind and nuclear, there's also obviously this Office of Science and the fact that we run scientific infrastructure all across the country, and have the most powerful supercomputers in the world, not by chance, but because they are strategic assets that we also leverage both for scientific discovery and for the national security missions. So I think as a department, we can't afford to focus only on one versus the other. We are going to need to do all of these.
How is DOE recruiting talent, given big tech's unlimited spending power and willingness to deploy it in this field?
So I think this is a huge challenge. It's not just a challenge for DOE, it's a challenge across the federal government. I think one of the assets that we have is our national labs. And so DOE has 17 national labs across the country. These labs house some of the most advanced and unique scientific infrastructure in the world. And I think that's really important because that is part of the reason why scientists and engineers are attracted to DOE. We're not an AI company. We're a science agency. And I think the access to some of the most powerful X-rays, particle accelerators, nanoscience centers, and the ability to work with others in this space to do things for the greater good. I mean, we are a mission-oriented organization. I think that has been what has attracted people to DOE and the national labs. But what you say is right. I think there's certainly the allure of working for companies, especially when salaries are 3x or 4x what they can make in the labs. But I think the mission drivers are there. I think will continue to need to invest. And I think that's part of the initiative that we are so excited about called FAST.
So the DOE recently rolled out a blueprint for how it wants to tackle AI, really viewing itself, at least in my view, as the AI hub for the federal government. Not the only entity in the federal government using AI, but as a premier AI center. Can you tell us a little bit about the main aspects of what's known as the FAST, and how much it might fully cost to implement it?
So I think the legislation that is out there really reflects essentially what we think is going to be needed. FAST stands for Frontiers in AI for Science, Security, and Technology, and it really reflects the gamut of DOE. To your point about the AI hub for the government, I think DOE is a mission-driven R&D agency, and we're focused on developing capabilities for the nation, right? Whether it's in scientific discovery, in clean energy technologies, or in the nuclear security space. So I think it reflects that, but I would say DOE is a steward of the national labs, but the labs do tremendous work for other agencies and enable other agency missions that in a way that I think is not fully understood. Happy to talk more about that. But essentially what FAST is, it's really built on 4 things that kind of build on each other. The first is around data, and everyone has said and knows data is the fuel for AI. It's essentially important. DOE collects, through all of these user facilities across the country and our research partnerships, tremendous amounts of high-quality scientific data, which we then think could be applied with compute, right? So DOE has leadership capability in computing for the country. We've, through our exascale computing program, have really driven many advances in energy efficiency computing, and happy to talk about that. And we think that there's an opportunity to develop sort of this next generation of highly efficient AI compute. If we have the data and the compute, we really want to be able to develop models that deeply understand science, that deeply understand math and physics and chemistry. And we have those experts at our national labs who do understand all of these different disciplines. And we think that in partnership with industry and academia, we'll be able to develop extremely powerful models that will be applied to our broad mission space, right? And enable the mission space of many other agencies as well. So, I mean, I think we're really excited about it. I think FAST really has the opportunity to supercharge scientific discovery in a way where you could see, you know, a century's worth of discoveries in a decade. Like, that is the promise that AI holds for all of our different mission spaces.
Yeah, and in there, it does mention coming up with AI models that, you know, are more energy efficient, and coming up with AI models that have fewer biases, and that sort of thing. So that is intriguing about the proposal, but again, it has to go through Congress and be fully funded, and you know, whether that gets done soon or into the future remains to be seen. When we had Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm here, I don't really have a concept of time anymore, so I'll say a couple months ago, may have been just yesterday, I don't know. And you know, she said that the AI energy challenge is what keeps her up at night right now. Now, this is somebody who has authority over the nuclear weapons stockpile. So, like, that really made me kind of stiffen up and take note of that.
Yeah.
Do you think, how has that, you know, come down on your office and been reflected in your work? And is it something that keeps you up at night as well?
So, absolutely, she has been very, very focused on this issue. And I think, you know, within the discussion we said, there's many different energy sources that are coming online and a lot of energy demand. AI is different in the sense that the loads are much larger oftentimes, and the expectations of companies as well is much faster. I think manufacturing is also experiencing this, but we're not hearing it as much in the same way. What I will say is the secretary, after that, a few months ago or yesterday, she charged her energy advisory board with looking at this exact issue. And in fact, they've been working and briefing her. They're going to be doing a public briefing for her next week. So I think stay tuned for that. But largely, you know, across the department, we are very much focused on this issue. So we have a cross-agency team that is actively looking at all of the tools, the resources, the technologies that can be brought to bear, and how DOE can use its convening power to really work with all of the different stakeholders, from the grid operators, utilities, regulators, to bring others into a conversation so that people feel part of that shared solution rather than feel like things are happening to them.
Gotcha. What is the biggest thing that you think people don't know about DOE's work but should, as it relates to what we've been talking about today?
So there are so many things, because I think the energy part of DOE is what throws folks. They hear DOE and they think, oh, energy. I think, I mentioned some of these things, but I will dive in a little bit more. I mean, DOE is the steward of high performance computing for the country. And, DOE has a history of setting extremely ambitious energy efficiency goals, things that people were not possible at the time, did not think could be possible, and then working closely with industry and academia to achieve those goals. And I think the exascale computing project is a really good example of how we were able to work on that over time in deep partnership with a number of companies to really enable this new era of exascale, which is the most powerful and fastest supercomputers to do the kinds of modeling and simulation of the climate for our stockpile that we really need. And I think the exascale computing project not only demonstrated large-scale energy efficiency in computing and drove that, but also cooling technologies at a large scale. So I think that is very exciting, the ability to do that. And I think importantly for our colleagues on the Hill, on time, under budget, is really a remarkable feat, because this is a huge engineering type project with many different labs and many different experts involved.
Yeah, and I think often when you look across the government, there's this entity, U.S. Global Change Research Program, which puts together these massive climate reports every couple of years. I don't think people realize that the DOE is actually the largest funder, or the lion's share of money goes there in terms of climate research, largely because of the computing.
Right, and and this enabling, I think the enabling function of DOE, right? Like, we steward the labs, we have these experts at the labs, but the compute, we work with many different agencies. I think most recently, really excited to see a partnership with NASA using our machine to model the landing of the Mars rover, or climate modeling, with NOAA. I mean, there's just so many examples across the board where we are partnering both in terms of compute, but also in terms of the expertise.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for being here. We're just out of time. So thank you, and I hope to see you again soon.
Yes, thank you so much.
Introducing our View from the Top moderator and Axios publisher, Nicholas Johnston.
Good morning. Thanks so much for being here today, waking up early to talk about AI and sustainability. I love our events. They're the physical manifestation of our journalism. It's a great chance for all of you to see that our newsletter writers like Andrew and Nick are actual real people and not robots, and we get to see that all of you are actual real people and not robots reading our newsletters. So that's great. Thank you for being here. And also, we're hugely, hugely grateful to our partners. They make everything at Axios possible. And so a huge, huge thanks to NVIDIA and Dell Technologies for making this conversation happen this morning. And so I'm very excited to welcome to the Axios stage for a View from the Top conversation, Dell Technologies Climate Solutions Architect, John Pfluger, and NVIDIA's Senior Director of Corporate Sustainability, Josh Parker. John and Josh, welcome to the Axios stage. Good morning.
Good morning.
Josh, how are you? So let's start big picture. There's so many stories about how AI is just transforming everything, transforming work, leading to medical breakthroughs in research and technology. But undercurrent of that is the energy consumption needs. And so, like, from your roles at these important technology companies, give us the real story behind the scenes of AI's impact on sustainability. How about John? You want to take that one first?
So, first of all, we're still in the early innings. And right now there are forecasts all over the place. You know, I took a look at one from EPRI, and it had 9% of U.S. energy consumption by 2030, or 3%, depending on scenario. Right. So they're all over the place. But one of the things, because one of my key messages is, we need to stop thinking of energy as the enemy. Right. AI uses energy to create models that provide value for us. They provide things for us. And so we need to know more about how much energy they're going to use. But the challenge is really, let's figure out how much energy are we going to need, and how do we provide it in a way that doesn't hurt the environment, where we can really take advantage of these things. And say we're going to learn a lot more in the next 12 to 18 months, I think, about where we're going to see innovation and where we're going to see demand.
Your view is almost to change the terms of that debate, instead of just looking at an energy consumption issue, looking at what those outputs are, what those gains can be.
And we're going to have a systems challenge in that this is what we need to figure out how to provide, right? So let's get the data and let's build out to what we know we need.
Yeah. So Josh, I know you have an interesting perspective on this. We spoke the other day about how to interpret these lines that are all going up and to the right, and how do they meet. Share a little bit with you your viewpoint of how that works.
Yeah, so my perspective is, and I think there's a really good case that this is true, is that AI is really the best tool for sustainability that the world has ever seen. If you think about what are AI's most obvious capabilities, one of them is optimization. So if you're trying to achieve efficiency, then AI ought to be your best friend. If you think about chip design, data center cooling, traffic optimization, all of these areas, if you want to increase efficiency and productivity, AI really is the best tool to do that.
So it's almost like looking at, as we see those lines go up and to the right on energy consumption, we don't know how AI will impact that energy consumption when it's brought to bear on it. Is that true?
That's right, yeah. So AI, of course, uses energy, and I think we're seeing some of that play out right now, where the energy, we need more to be able to deploy AI in this valuable way that John mentioned. But AI, when you turn its attention to this efficiency problem and sustainability problem, it has huge capabilities across sectors, across industries, not just within data centers, of course, but if you look at transportation and industrial applications and so forth, it could actually move the needle to reduce energy consumption across all these industries.
I mean, you had an interesting perspective on that when we talked before about that lag here, where when AI will be so effective that it'll catch up and begin to drive down that energy consumption curve, even possibly. Give us a little bit of the sense of how long that might take. I know it's hard to look in a crystal ball with AI because all the models are immediately wrong in the forecast, but give us a sense of how quickly that might happen.
Well, I think what we're seeing is that we're moving very quickly towards that. And one of the catalyzing factors there is the fact that a lot of the companies that are deploying AI, including companies like Dell, have these ambitious commitments to use renewable energy and to reduce emissions. And so it's some very responsible companies who are leading the charge to modernize the grid and to make sure that the supply is catching up with the demand. So I think it is a very much a near-term problem rather than a long-term.
As both of you being working at technology companies with climate sustainability, like literally in your job titles, can you talk a little bit about how that works in the real world? Like with your customers and your corporations, sort of how does this translate into things actual people are doing?
So when I look at AI in the context of the effect it's going to have on our part of society and our industry, I like to look at it through 4 lenses. The first is the footprint lens, which we have to look at, we have to work at to make that as efficient as possible. There is really no sense in wasting energy, even if we want it. The second is something that I think is happening today and has already happened in places, which is actually applying AI to the data center itself. In direct application, what can AI do to make the data center itself more efficient? And that's one of the places where we're going to start to see the paybacks. And when you look at what percentage AI is going to be of data center energy use in 2030, you see some interesting projections. It's entirely possible that AI is going to pay for itself just in the data center. But then you get to the third lens, which is the role that AI can help with our customers and what they're trying to do within their businesses. And there are enormous wins there. And you get to the really exciting stuff in that fourth lens, which is the role that AI can have in really solving the big societal challenges.
Right. Josh, tell a little bit about your sense of what customers are asking for and how they interact with this, and what are the ways you try to help them?
Yeah. So as John mentioned, we're very much in the early stages of this fourth industrial revolution where we're able to actually manufacture intelligence. And so we're seeing a lot of innovation, and we're also seeing a lot of demand. So customers are just hungry for the capabilities, for the performance. But at the same time, they're also asking us for energy efficiency, because to deploy these very, very impressive systems, compute-intensive systems with high density, requires energy efficiency for them to operate. So customers are definitely asking us for that. And that's the wonderful thing about this accelerated computing platform on which we're building AI, is that it is the most energy efficient platform we've seen in computing. It's up to 20 times more energy efficient for a mix of workloads compared to traditional CPU-only systems. So this platform that's really creating the possibility of AI, accelerated computing, it is sustainable computing because it is so much more energy efficient.
Are those sustainability incentives in the right places now, or like we're in Washington, D.C., so everyone in this room is probably, they might be able to help if they work for the right boss, or are the right boss. Are those incentives in place now, or what can folks in this room do to help continue with that progress?
I would
Go ahead.
So first thing, I mentioned this is a systems problem, right? So we are going to need more energy than we're using today. Now, that isn't just a matter of energy efficiency, but it's a matter also of how are we going to move electricity around the country? How are we going to do that in a way that's not wasteful? We've got a grid that in places is back in the 1970s and was only built for just sending power one way.
Right.
And now we're sending power two ways, we're sending signals, and that's going to be necessary in order to meet the renewables demand, which is going to be one of the fastest ways to get that energy online.
Grid investment comes up in every single conversation like this. Josh, is that on your list too? What else do you think Washington do to help?
Yeah, so the existing kind of innovation and pressures are very much moving us in the direction that we all want to go. And part of this is because, again, the companies that are deploying AI at scale are some of the ones that have the strongest commitments to do this in a responsible way. Grid modernization is absolutely something that we can all agree on, and I think this is the opportune time for us to do it. We have AI to help us. We have companies that are motivated to do it in a clean, responsible way, and we've got this huge value that we can unlock if we do this, if we deploy the energy in a way that will unlock the capabilities.
You've both said that we're very early in this process, but quickly, are there real-world examples already of folks who are figuring this out, changes that we're seeing, sustainability efforts that are working in the real world?
Yeah, so there are really compelling cases, and this, again, is across industries, across sectors, because AI can be deployed anywhere. But one of my favorites is there's a large manufacturing company called Wistron, who's a close partner with NVIDIA. They took our technology and our Omniverse platform, which is a 3D modeling simulation platform. They created a digital twin of one of their manufacturing facilities. So they modeled the manufacturing facility in this 3D digital space. They ran AI, some computational fluid dynamics to try to optimize energy in their manufacturing facility. And by the way, because they were using this accelerated computing platform, they did it 15,000 times faster than they were doing it previously with CPUs. And they immediately were able to reduce the energy consumption in manufacturing in this facility by 10%. So very quickly, in this large industrial application, a huge electronics manufacturing company was able to reduce energy very quickly.
And those are the trends to keep an eye on, I think, in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And from our part, there's a company we've been working with out of Canada for several years called Nature Fresh Farms. And Nature Fresh Farms wants to be the largest independent greenhouse producer in Canada. And so they use our edge technology to collect data from their plants. They bring that data back where they use AI to understand how the plants are doing, where they need interventions, what they can do to grow these plants with the right types of resources, right? And fantastic stuff. They've been doing it now for years, and we're only delivering better and better tools to them.
So this isn't theory anymore. This is real world. So as we about to get the hook here to wrap up, we'd like to end on one fun thing here at Axios. John, I want to give you a chance. Like, as we face all this AI change in front of us, what is your advice, and from what book did you get it from?
We talked about this, and I didn't think you were going to bite on it, but you did.
One of my
favorite books is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I think some of the best advice is on its cover, which is don't panic, right? We are still in the early years of this. There's still a lot we don't know. There's a lot we do know, and it is the ring is there to really use this stuff for good. We just have to grab for it.
You'll need to get a pin. Josh, can you top that?
No, I can't top it. But I say you could talk about all these wonderful things that AI is going to do, from medicine to material science to sustainability. It's hard not to be just totally consumed by those huge potentials. But something that I love about AI is just how it creates this sense of wonder that is new and fresh. Someone who previously didn't have any experience creating videos can suddenly produce professional level videos, or can write poetry and can use AI for all of these really fun, exciting ways. Brings a lot of wonder and excitement and enjoyment back to life, and I think enables all of us, empowers all of us to do more than we previously could do.
I love not losing that sense of optimism. I also love not panicking. Josh and Josh, thanks so much for being here. Thanks to NVIDIA and thanks to Dell Technologies for making this conversation possible. I'm going to bring Andrew right back to the stage.
Welcoming back to the stage, Andrew Friedman.
Hey, everyone. I'm excited for the next interview. It's a guest well-versed in these issues. Somebody I've been talking to for quite a while as a reporter on climate and energy. Joining us from Capitol Hill, Congressman Sean Casten.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So first, let's address the political moment that we're in. A few
I have
things
no
have
idea what you're
happened
talking
recently. Don't know if anybody's aware. You're someone who called for President Biden to step aside in the race, not in the first wave, but a little bit later on. Now that has happened, and Vice President Harris has begun launching her campaign, do you see potential daylight between her and the president on climate and energy, recalling that she had run to the left of him during the primaries in 2019, 2020 on fracking, on a number of issues? She excited the climate base a little bit more, let's just say, than Biden did.
So fundamentally, no, because if you look under the Biden White House, we passed the single biggest climate bill that was ever passed by any government in the history of the human species.
I was asleep.
I don't know what it would
totally
mean
asleep.
to be to the left of that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, I would also say, tragically, prioritizing people's access to clean energy and clean energy has become a partisan thing. Mm-hmm. And so it makes me angry to say that, like, actually, like, giving a crap about leaving this world in a better place than we found it, and giving consumers access to cheap energy, right? Because at the end of the day, the IRA is primarily tax credits, right? No one is going to go out and get that 30% tax credit unless they're willing to put up the other 70% of the capital and earn a return for their investors on that. So all this is bringing cheap energy onto the grid. That's become partisan, and you know that there's a whole rich conversation there. But no, I don't fundamentally see why. I mean, I would, frankly, having passed a bill that on our math delivers about 40% of what's scientifically necessary, I hope we get the rest done, right? But no, I don't see a lot of daylight on there. And we'll be watching, obviously, closely with, how she staffs out her advisors and what have you. But let's keep winning.
Yep. What excites you and worries you about AI and our energy infrastructure today? We were talking a little bit backstage. about how some of this is a little bit misunderstood by the public, by lawmakers on how our energy system really works. But as a former clean tech exec, what excites and worries you about this new technology and the energy demands?
So I should first say that I have one of the wisest people I've ever met on energy is my former VP of engineering back when I was manufacturing little custom-built power plants. And he was a very crusty guy who grew up with a slide rule and was arguably 200 plus IQ type and all the warts that go with that. And he said to me at one point, every advance in technology gives us more precision and less knowledge. And it was this interesting observation, right? Because he's like, on my slide rule, I have to know the order of magnitude answer to the question. Now I get an engineer who comes to me and says, I've got the answer within 16 digits, and I don't know if it's millions or billions. And I think AI is in many ways just a continuation of that trend. We had built, in my utility days, it's basically AI. I mean, I was using Visual Basic in Microsoft. It was not nearly as big a data sets, but it was the same tools of let me grab data off the web, let me optimize, let me find relationships. And we used it to not only better predict our upcoming load than our customers were telling us their load was going to be, but we reduced our revenue variability by 90%. In other words, with a computer model just taking in weather data and economic data and all sorts of other stuff, we were doing a vastly better job than our customers were at telling us how much electricity, chilled water, steam they were going to use next year. That's awesome. I also have absolutely no idea what the fundamental relationships are that was pulling out, right? You're building all this in, you've got your weighting factors, but you're getting a tool that's very useful, which gives you a lot more precision, but there's less fundamental knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that does just at a philosophical level, that scares me a little bit because, I've run very analog utility plants with people who had unbelievable expertise in understanding that when that thing vibrates, I move this over here and that makes this thing work better. And now you've got a lot of computational skill that it never vibrates, but are we designing a system to anticipate all future variables, or are we designing a system that is correlations based on past history? And particularly in a climate changing world where things are changing very quickly, how do we manage that? I don't sweat, as we were talking backstage, I don't sweat too much about the load growth, only because we know that the path to decarbonize is to electrify everything, to massively build out the loads. We know that's paced by our ability to build clean energy and transmission quick enough to connect it all up. And AI is just a part of that larger story, which isn't to trivialize the challenge, right? But I don't think it's unique from, as the last speaker said, the rise of electric vehicles, bringing manufacturing back. We just got to do that in a responsible way.
And you're somebody who's been an enthusiastic proponent of permitting reform and building new transmission. What is your reaction to the new bill that dropped yesterday in the Senate, the Manchin-Barrasso Senate permitting reform bill, which has some of the transmission elements, the Big Wires Act, et cetera. I'm curious if that's something that you can throw your support behind, or at least looking at pretty seriously.
So there's pieces I like in it on the, as you mentioned, some of the transmission permitting stuff. Interregional is critical. Like, we do a really bad job in this country of building wires that are designed to lower the cost at nodes. We do a really bad job of building wires that will connect across the country. It's almost absurdly easy for Pepco to build a wire within their network that will connect two parts of the Pepco system for reliability reasons. It's absurdly difficult to build a wire from Chicago to Iowa that will bring cheap power from Iowa into the Chicago market. And where I think the Manchin bill misses something important is that one of the biggest challenges to transmission is that none of the people who have the ability to approve wires in this country have an economic incentive to lower the price of power. If you build out, a massive data center for one of your AI networks, and you want to put a bunch of solar on the roof of that facility, and maybe you're gonna put even more than you can because you can make so much money because the price is so high, you want to export to the grid. You are going to get into a fight with your utility about that. The joke I shared with you backstage is that getting permission from a utility to interconnect with their grid is like getting permission from a man to date his wife. You might well be better and in the public interest for you to change up here, but you're not going to get that approval without a lot of fight. And what the Manchin-Barrasso bill doesn't do, that Mike Levin and I's bill does, is say, if you get the profit signals right, the permitting problems are easy. If you don't get the profit signals right, you're stuck with all these top-down mandates. And so one of the things that I think is sort of key to what Mike and I have been trying to do, and we'll see where the Senate bill goes, we'll try to push this in, is let's change the way that rates are done. Right now, you get a guaranteed return on capital if you're a regulated utility for the capital you deploy, and in theory, your operating costs are pass-throughs. We could change those rules. We could go through and say, if you're helping your state meet their renewable energy goals, if you're decarbonizing, if you're lowering the congestion prices on the nodes on your system, we'll give you a little bit higher return on equity. Let's get you aligned with your customers instead of fighting with them. There are places that have done that in the country, and it's worked really well. We know how to do it. We need to do that nationally. And I think the Manchin-Barrasso bill is a good start on the transmission side. I think the oil and gas stuff is goofy. That's how you get a West Virginia senator and Barrasso to agree to put it forward. But it's a good, it's a marker. It's a start.
Yeah. Something that I've kind of had as a pet issue as a journalist writing about, and something that you're interested in, you've lamented the lack of the Office of Technology Assessment in today's Congress and co-sponsored a bill to reestablish and improve it. Now, you can describe what the entity was and why it was eliminated or when in 1995, but do you think it would play a key role in educating lawmakers more on AI? I mean, do you find that education piece critical at this point?
I'll tell you, it is not only lawmakers. And we got to run the dates here in this personal history. So in 95, the OTA gets eliminated. I get out of grad school in 98 and go to work at Arthur D. Little doing technology consulting. And one of the first jobs I had was BP hired us because they were going to rebrand themselves as Beyond Petroleum. Yep. So we were to evaluate every possible zero carbon fuel chain that they could get into, the well-to-wheels costing, emissions, blah, 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 blah. They did similar stuff. And as I would go to our library, which at the time was an analog library, there were all these OTA reports that if I wanted to know how does a gasifier work, how do you make dimethyl ether, there were all of these rich studies that we could go through, and then I would show up in a meeting and be the smart guy who just got out of grad school, but somehow he seems to know about how all these technologies work. And I said to my boss, how come there's nothing in the library after 95? And he said, because Gingrich eliminated the office. And I said, well, that's a bummer. And he was like, it's not that bad because now people pay us to do things that they used to get for free from the government. Right? And it was wonderful for the technology consulting world. But now you've got and again, not just members of Congress, but the public at large. You want to understand how these technologies work. And the OTAs, what they turned out, it wasn't just that it was accurate, but it was accurate in a way that a layperson could understand. How does this work? You don't have to have a master's in biochemical engineering to understand this stuff, right? And getting rid of that office was a conscious desire to be dumb. Period, full stop. I think it's the curse of Newt Gingrich. He made us dumber. And we need that back, but for members of Congress as well. I mean, I've had conversations with Republican friends across the aisle who want to do something on climate, who have lamented that if somebody who really understands climate and energy and the nexus of those and the technologies comes to the Hill, they don't waste their time going to meetings with Republicans because it's just not productive. And what this colleague shared with me is he's like, I'm trying to figure out how to make it okay for those conversations to happen. Well, a start would be if you could just you don't have to tell Mike Johnson that you're going to go to the library and read this report, right? Like, it's like having books about, different gender identity in the library. Like, talk about this before you want to come out, right? And it's just hard that stuff isn't there right now.
Yeah. The OTA reports was something that I used to use as a journalist as well. Do you think that AI's power aspects, the power demand aspects, are at all changing the conversation about at least reforming transmission issues among your Republican colleagues?
So the challenge with transmission, and I want to put this in a non-democratic Republican way, although coincidentally it has some overlap, but I truly think that's just a coincidence. If you were to, let me give you a number. The US generates about $200 of GDP for every million BTUs of primary energy we use. It's a nerd number, but think of that as like our energy productivity. We have labor productivity, capital productivity, that's our energy productivity. The UK generates about 360, almost twice as many dollars per unit of energy as we do. Switzerland generates 600. And broadly speaking, if you look at countries that are not resource rich, fossil energy resource rich to countries that are not made conscious decisions to make the most out of the resources they have. The US has always had an energy policy that has been focused on the interests of energy producers and only occasionally made policy choices to benefit consumers. Now, I say all that because now let's suppose that you want to build a transmission wire that's going to connect that cheap Iowa wind to my region in Chicago. That is an immediate threat to a utility who's making money at $70 a megawatt hour. It's an immediate threat to someone who was mining coal to bring that up to that plant. It's an immediate threat to, a gas fracking well that was bringing gas up, because all of a sudden you bring that cheap wind in, none of those other assets are going to operate. It is a massive benefit to consumers, right? And what that means, and the reason why I give the international numbers, is that if you could conceivably, with existing technology, double US GDP with no increase in energy use, which is essentially what those numbers suggest, that would arguably be the biggest wealth transfer in the history of our country, and it would be a wealth transfer from underpopulated energy producing regions to populated energy consuming regions. Coincidentally, that's red America to blue America, right? And so that creates a political problem. I remember having a conversation with Garrett Graves at one point that his district in Louisiana has issues that are politically not that different from Iran. If you really embraced cheap energy, he'd be surrounded by lots of unemployed young men, and that's a political risk. Right? Garrett's comment at the time was, I don't like being compared to the Ayatollah. I'm not comparing you to the Ayatollah, but I'm sympathetic to that challenge, right? And so how do we get that done? And so transmission is this enormous opportunity for consumers, transmission reform, but it's also a huge wealth transfer. And what I'm sort of hoping, and we were very intentional in the IRA of, number one, expanding the definition of environmental justice communities to include those communities that are going to be left behind in the transition, and making sure that we preferentially invest in those communities. So the fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene now has a battery manufacturing producer in her district, that's intentional, right? And the hope is that as we go out, there's the Iowa delegation that we keep coming back to is all Republican. The Iowa economy depends a lot on ethanol and wind, right? It is not an economy that depends on fracking. At some point, that's in their interest to say, well, I want to go and push this through. I don't think we're there yet, but look where the leadership of the Republican Party is from right now. Mitch McConnell's from coal country. Mike Johnson's from the oil and gas. Kevin McCarthy was from Bakersfield. There needs to be a turnover in leadership in the Republican Party to get to that point where we'd put consumers first.
Well, this is all fascinating. You always bring considerable brain power and experience on these issues, so I thank you for being here. I'm being told to wrap up, but hopefully we'll have you back here again soon.
Thank you, Andrew. For sure.
All right, thanks. Thanks.
Please welcome to the stage Axios Pro energy and climate policy reporter Nick Sobczak.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nick Sobczak. I am an energy and climate reporter for Axios Pro. It is wonderful to be with you all here this morning. Thank you for joining us early to talk about AI and sustainability. For our final interview today, I'm excited to welcome our next guest to the Axios stage, the co-founder and managing partner of Coefficient, Tom Hassenbuehler. Tom, thank you for joining us. I think maybe we should pick up on a thread that Andrew and Congressman Casson were talking about. And that's kind of the politics of energy right now, because they're a little bit stuck after the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. There's been a lot of discussion about permitting reform. Saw Senator Manchin's bill yesterday. But lawmakers have had a lot of trouble agreeing on what that means and what we should do for the power grid. I'm curious how you think the rise of AI and its implications for the energy sector could change that dynamic, and how will it affect the politics of energy?
Thanks for the question, and thanks for inviting me to be here. You're right, it's an exciting time to be in energy politics. You've heard already this morning, listening in the back room here, how AI will transform the economy. What AI will do while it's transforming the economy, I believe, is also force policymakers to really start to address modernization of our electric infrastructure as well as our digital infrastructure, and start to think of those things a little more symbiotically. In the past, even at the committee where I used to work in energy and commerce, a lot of these topics have been siloed. So you've seen, commerce and digitization people focus on the big data issues at large and not really talk about the energy needs, the energy usage. What AI has done in the last several months, especially, is really wake up the public to the need that energy infrastructure and electrification is digital infrastructure, and those things underpin each other. And we don't have, without growth in those sectors, we don't get to grow AI in the economy. And so AI will also enable policy solutions that are going to help us think about how to address climate and energy policy a bit differently as well. And because of that, I think we've got a real ripe opportunity to reframe and almost reorient some of the policy narrative in Washington around these issues. And I'm quite optimistic about how that's going to play out.
So, as you alluded to, I think the energy sector, the private sector in general, is starting to wake up to the reality of increased power demand. Obviously, there's a lot of optimism about AI from tech companies, as we heard. And you testified at one of the first hearings at this kind of nexus on the Hill. I'm curious what you think the challenges to educating policymakers are, and where you see lawmakers starting to step in on this issue.
Challenges-wise, I think you've got some new constituencies that are kind of intermingling with each other that haven't been done historically in Washington. The hearing that I testified in was at the House Energy and Commerce Committee. The Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee had a big hearing on AI. The takeaways that I had from that, and I think others would probably agree, is that the tone of the hearing is a bit different. It immediately forces policymakers to confront these issues in a different way. You're looking at national security issues all of a sudden. You're looking at competition with China on AI. You're looking at, we've heard about load growth and kind of the rise of demand on this. It forces this kind of this lack of coordination that had been sort of not discussed before is now, being front and center in these debates. And so to educate policymakers, I think you really need to kind of use some of the tools, the Department of Energy. We heard from Helena earlier about such, all the great tools that they use. But again, they thought about this in these silos. And so going forward, what you're going to have is new leadership at all the committees. You're going to have new chairmen. You're going to have probably new ranking members, at least in the Senate, likely not in the House. And so those new members are paying a lot of attention to these issues. They're already trying to kind of think outside the box on how to address them, and it gives hope. Again, it's not going to be solved overnight. Yes, the politics aren't going to go away, but
What AI will do is, force policymakers to confront these issues in a new light and potentially find some opportunity.
So we obviously heard from DOE today on that sort of research and development and competition with China side. What else do you think the federal government needs to be doing?
Well, there's a lot that needs to be done. I think figuring out how to better integrate economic development into electric infrastructure development is one key missing link. You hear a lot about like load forecasts and the challenges that utilities are having with kind of getting ahead of the curve on this. A lot of them have been caught kind of flat-footed. I would almost call it radical collaboration is necessary between utilities, tech companies, and industrial and manufacturing sector, because as has been mentioned, it's not just an AI and data center boom that's causing a lot of this new load growth. It's electrification, it's onshoring of manufacturing. So Congress can help set the stage and the tone for how this plays out across the country by forcing folks to come to the table and think about these issues. We talk a lot about transmission and interregional and regional grids. The lifeblood of the economy is electric power, and regardless of your positions on how it's actually fueled, the wires and the delivery of the electrons are super important in kind of how we think about these issues going forward because of so much new technology that's being enabled by AI. You have the ability to dispatch differently. You have the ability to be more flexible in the demand side of the curve. You can be more active in the system. All these customers who are leading these transformative policies are very bullish on these new technologies, but they need policy and regulation to catch up to the plate. And frankly, it's way behind. And so that's where I see the optimism.
Yeah, on that regulation catching up side, FERC just issued a rulemaking on regional transmission. People talk a lot about the need for some kind of framework for interregional transmission, the big interstate power lines. Just curious to hear your thoughts on that FERC rule and what else needs to be done. What are the next steps here on building out the grid?
Yeah, so first off, again, the economy is growing, so we need more electric power, we need more transmission. Second, I think Order 1920 is a good step in the right direction for moving us in that process. What it really does, and what's so important is, customers who, whether they're large industrial customers or residential customers, all have to pay for this transmission. That's all passed through in their rates. What the Order 1920 does is help to integrate more economic planning and more regional thought processes into the planning process, and also will require states and other folks to consider new technologies like grid enhancing technologies that are going to help not only make the system work better and more efficiently, but also make this save money. And really we're talking about major, billions and billions of dollars of cost here. Every tool should be on the toolbox. The challenges with the Order 1920 obviously are kind of the historic tension between the federal government and the states and how that plays out in looking at the grid as an integrated system. Every state has the power to control their own generation mix and achieve their own decarbonization plans. But when you're trying to operate this as a country on a unified grid, and while you're competing with China geopolitically and other places, you really need to think of this in a much more holistic way. And that Order 1920 is a step in that direction. Again, there will be challenges. There already are lawsuits around it. I think with recent Supreme Court cases that have come out, again, it puts the impetus back on Congress to really start to look at these issues. And you saw just in the Manchin and Barrasso bill some sections on transmission that was released yesterday. This thread is not going away anytime soon. In fact, I think it's going to get more integrated into the larger digital infrastructure conversation.
So what about the generation side? Because I think this is a place where, especially Congress, tends to get a little polarized. You kind of fall into this, like, Democrats want transmission, Republicans want to make sure we have baseload power sort of framework. I'm not sure that's quite the way folks on the private sector side would look at it, but I'm curious, how you think we should avoid AI data centers causing greenhouse gas emissions to spike? And also sort of what the need is for baseload power in terms like gas, nuclear, that sort of thing?
Yeah. I think well, first off, most of the companies driving the AI revolution all have very strong clean energy goals, and so they're working around the clock to try to figure out ways to change business models, to innovate. But again, a lot of the times they run into regulatory delays, or they get stymied by kind of a very highly regulated electric infrastructure system that's very disparate. On the flip side of that, I think when you look at generation issues, clean, firm baseload power has become kind of a thing that people talk about now, and I view that as a way, there's a lot of focus on nuclear, there's a lot of focus on new technologies. There's companies that are stepping up to the plate economically who are driving some of these technologies and this new demand, putting skin in the game, putting actual resources down. Those types of arrangements, while they don't move fast, will have a very high impact on the outcome of this, and hopefully could turn down some of the temperature on, sort of the generation fights. Granted, we have a lot of retiring generation still. Yes, those are issues that need to be addressed. Yes, natural gas is currently part of the system and those things, but AI, just like in anything else, has ways of incentivizing and helping optimize methane emission leaks and other types of technologies too that can help clean up the existing system in a way that I think policymakers are just starting to get their heads around.
Give us a vibe check of kind of what you're hearing from private sector clients. I mean, are people excited about the possible benefits of AI that you mentioned, anxious about the power load growth potential? I mean, how are people feeling right now?
I think anxious excitement is probably the right word to take both of yours. I think there's hope that this narrative will help kind of awaken people to think differently, like I said. And so I think, by looking at the tone of the hearings, by looking at the high level of interest, I just got back from NARUC last week where these topics were front and center in front of the state regulators. But it is it's new. And so with anything new, there comes hype, there comes a little bit of fear, there comes a little bit of consternation among folks, and the politics hasn't quite shaken out yet. So I think from private sector clients, there's some nervousness about ultimately not knowing how it's going to play out, while the threat of this being a global issue, this being real competition with China and other nations to dominate in the AI space. That is what keeps folks up at night if we can't have a sense of national urgency around this issue to help address multi-state permitting and help address some of the bottlenecks that are prohibiting our load growth issues from happening. That's what keeps them up.
What keeps you up? Which one of those issues really grabs you and you think it's a primary challenge in this space?
I think, notwithstanding politics at large right now, I think the issue of, not being able to break through the politics to talk about what's good for the country here on this topic is what, makes me a little nervous. I think that, I want to believe that, you've got enough American innovation and ingenuity here and kind of leadership that can kind of parse through party lines. And I want to be optimistic that I think that will play out regardless of, what happens in lame duck sessions or, what people are focused on in Washington right now. It will play out next year in a way where, Congress is going to assert itself in a way that we might not have seen in a while, because not just because of, the new Congress and new chairman and the day, but also because of the Supreme Court cases and some of the issues that have just come out, really putting a bullseye on Congress to be, it's time to lead here, and it's time to really think about how these things are going to get executed. And the AI, and data revolution that's happening and disrupting the entire economy, mostly in a positive way. We have a lot of productivity. There are a lot of issues that you still have to work with, but that is a good story. And whether you're a Republican or Democrat, you should want to see that optimized and enhanced and America lead on that topic.
So we're running out of time here, but to wrap up, just give us a quick, bold prediction or hot take about the future of this issue and where you think this is headed.
Well, I think, sound like a broken record, but I will say only Congress can ensure that the U.S. can power the AI revolution. There's too many multi-state issues happening. And so because of that, I think next Congress, AI will be the driving force that will enable one of the most significant pieces of legislation. And it won't be called an energy bill or a climate bill. It'll be sort of a digital infrastructure bill that wraps these topics in, but also takes down the temperature on some of the partisan issues that have really plagued, frankly, these topics since the cap and trade debates and back to Energy Policy Act of 2005 and 7, we haven't had a significant bill. So I'm bullish on Congress asserting itself and this potential opportunity being one that can help unite people.
Well, Tom, we are out of time, so I'll have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to everyone in the audience and all of you that are watching on the live stream for joining this morning. If you don't already, a reminder to subscribe to any of our Axios newsletters at axios.com/newsletters. And if you're interested in subscribing to my newsletter, which is the Pro Energy Policy newsletter, please come find me or somebody from Axios afterwards, and have a great rest of your morning.
Thank you.